Well, indeed, that was an important part of the design, was separating the towns and the scenes in Brokeback Mountain. Part of it was film stock. And I used whenever we were in Brokeback Mountain, I used a very low ASA, actually 50 ASA stock, Kodak. And so low grain. And the idea was for it to be very clear, pristine, and feeling like fresh air and transparent and romantic in a way that was unfiltered. You know, we didn't want it to be postcards with grad filters and golden and that stuff. But we wanted it to feel like you're there, and you know the crisp air and how it feels, you know, cold and that sort of stuff. So part of it was the film stock, and the towns I used a 250 ASA stock, that a little tiny bit contrasty but not saturated in colors, and also the production design went for desaturated colors, and it was supposed to feel a little bit gray and maybe desolate could be a word, like you say, and. I think that's what mostly gives it. Also, again, the camera work was pretty simple in both situations. So we didn't do something like, okay, the mountains will have sweeping camera moves, and then the city will be static. In both cases, it's mostly static cameras and, you know, simple. But I think it was more about the lighting and maybe the camera placement and. I don't know, we didn't want it to be either this sort of super big close-ups, very intense, you know, just sort of let the performances play out, and that was it, basically.
Another question? In the second round, can you speak up loudly?
Sure. Do you mind mentioning what reels we're going to see for which pictures? Maybe it'll help us organize our questions better. If I should save a question about Alexander for later, or...
Oh, sure. Well, this was Reel 6 from Brokeback, and we're going to be watching next Reel 4 from Babel, and then after that, Reel 6 from Lust Caution. Go for it. So you get one more question.
The final battle sequence in Alexander, since you mentioned the picture, is just really stunning, and I'm curious about some of the filter choices there and your conversations with Oliver. I'm speaking specifically of right after Colin is injured. I think it's the Battle of the Daspies. I might have the name wrong. And you go to a red tone for the entire concluding portion of that sequence. Do you mind talking a little bit about that sequence in particular? And then since you also mentioned that this picture, Brokeback was something of an antidote for that experience. I know that Alexander was a massive globe-trotting effort. I'm curious if you can talk a little generally about the picture and also about the final cut. Oliver's revisiting of the movie 3 years later, actually twice, and whether or not you sort of continued the collaboration with him so that he could revisit the movie twice, once for the director's cut and then for the final cut.
Okay. Well, thank you for asking about Alexander. It is a film that I do have very close to my heart, and that scene particularly, well, the whole movie was incredibly challenging and fun and crazy. But Oliver's really very open to ideas, and he expects his team to bring him things. In that sense, he's totally different to Ang Lee. It's like they're opposites. Oliver's totally intuitive, and you never know really what's going to happen, and he doesn't really design shots, so you see a rehearsal, you don't know where the camera's going to go, so sometimes it'll be up to me to kind of set up something and he'll react to it, like it or not, and then from there we'll build. It's not like, okay, Oliver, let's do a 50 millimeter from here. No, you know, he'll say things like, okay, Rodrigo, let's do something classic. And then I have to interpret that and present it. Or he just works from the script, totally. I mean, all the time he's on with the script, and so it's all in the script. So lots of times I will design things or shots or camera placement according to the way I read the script, and then he'll react to it. Anyway, that scene particularly, I remember when we were scouting in Morocco, I had this idea of using infrared color film for that section, but I hadn't really articulated it in my mind. So, I mentioned to Oliver, I said, you know, this film has the opportunity of going, you know, being based on reality and as if you were there in the, you know, in those days in Macedonia and then in the battles and all that. But it also has an epic level, because Alexander was always, you know, wanting to be epic himself, you know, and wanted to be Achilles, basically. So he said, really? Oh, and so I said, we can be even surreal sometimes. Really, Rodrigo? Like where? Like how? So then I was on the spot and I said, well, maybe when Alexander is near death in the battle in India, he could see the world differently. When you're about to die, or maybe, you know, maybe he sees things that normally that exist, but normally we can't see, like infrared is something that exists. It's light that's there, but our eyes simply can't see it. What? What do you? So I shot tests, and it was a huge deal, because it's very risky to shoot a battle scene with infrared, and the studio and everybody was totally against it, and they said, oh, Rodrigo, maybe you can do it digitally, and I proved that we couldn't with the tests. And then I shot tests normal and then with infrared, and there was no way we weren't able to reproduce it digitally, just no way. Anyway, it was a huge deal. And finally, Oliver, I showed him the final tests, and he pulled me aside and said, Rodrigo, are you sure? And I lied, and I said I was sure. And then he said, okay, I'll support you on this, and so we did it. And we shot with a separate camera that was with normal film, and the other camera with infrared, just in case. The irony is that the normal film camera was developed in France. We were in Thailand at that time. And the infrared was developed in one lab in London. All the material that went into France that day was X-rayed and ruined. So the infrared saved us. Anyway, for me it was a huge thrill when I saw, because you don't know really how infrared will react. So seeing those dailies was one of the biggest thrills I've had. It was like, you know, the yellow blood and, you know, all that's, it's sort of
Serendipitous.
Yeah, exactly. You don't know the
Happy
results. So it was, oh, wow, look at that. You know, some of the shots I didn't like, but most of them were really interesting. So anyway, thanks for asking about that.
Just a quick follow-up. To hear Oliver tell it on the commentary, there's no footage that's now left that he didn't use to put into the final cut. What kind of experience was that for you to see this much longer version of the movie than what was originally cut for theatrical?
Yeah, well, always when the movies are whittled down, you know, there are all these things that you worked so hard on and then don't end up in the movie. So, you know, it was good to see him put it all back in, and it could never been out in the theaters like that. So it was an opportunity for him to, yeah, and it was a never-ending process. The post-production of that movie, even for the first cut, was crazy long, and so then to continue the process, yeah, at least for the second cut, I was still working with him and color correcting the new scenes and stuff. The third cut I wasn't really much involved in. I don't remember why, but yeah, it was a long process.
Thanks for your question. With the interest of time, we're going to move on to Babel. And like I said, I believe this was reel 4. And this is a release print lent to us from the Paramount Archive. And then we'll talk a little bit more. And if you guys have questions on any of the films we're seeing or not seeing, feel free to raise your hand and ask about them. We'll come back in a little bit. Okay, thanks. Really amazing movie. This one, your camera work feels really immersed in the characters, like you're right there, experiencing their energy on all the different storylines. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you approached this film and the different looks and how you, you know, carried that through in 4 different countries, was this?
Yeah. Well, let's see, in terms of the camera work, it would seem, you know, being handheld and all that, that it would be improvised, but really it's not. Alejandro is he's very aware of the language of cinema and how editing will impact, you know, the movie, certainly. I mean, you can see it in all his movies, you know, the editing is really important, and the sound, certainly. So when we designed the scenes, and since we started, you know, since Amores Perros and before that shooting commercials, we did sit down together every time before actually shooting the movie and discussed every scene, how to shoot it, specific shots.